"You need to leave, Mom. This house belongs to me now." He didn't yell. That's what stung the most. How calm he was, like this wasn't a betrayal, just business. Behind him, his wife leaned on the staircase rail with a smirk that twisted my stomach. "We've already changed the locks," she said, as if I were some squatter, not the woman who once rocked their baby to sleep in that very living room. I stared at the chipped molding I painted by hand. My voice didn't shake. I simply said, "Then you better pray it doesn't rain tonight." Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. It wasn't always like this. I wasn't always this quiet. Once my laugh filled every corner of that house, and the sound of my late husband's hammer echoed through the walls as we built our life one paycheck, one wooden plank, one evening at a time. We didn't have much when we started, just each other, a baby boy who barely slept, and a plot of land with more weeds than soil. But we believed in sweat, in calloused hands, in making something out of nothing. James, my husband, used to say, "We'll build our forever, right here, Marjorie." And we did. The house started as a shell, just 2 bedrooms and a crooked front porch. We had no hired help. Just James, his brother on weekends, and me hauling materials from town in the back of our dented Chevy. I painted every wall myself, sometimes with one hand on the roller and the other holding our son, David, who always wanted to be close to me. David was my world back then. He was a sensitive child, always clutching my apron when strangers came near. At night, when James fell asleep early from exhaustion, David would sneak into our bed and whisper, "Tell me about when I was born, Mama." I must have told that story 100 times. He was born during a storm, the kind that shook the windows and rattled your bones. James couldn't even get the truck started, so we wrapped me in blankets and walked to old Doc Shealy's down the road. I gave birth in his parlor, right by the fireplace. That night, when I held David in my arms, thunder cracked through the sky, but all I could hear was his first cry. That cry made me a mother. That moment made me whole. I dedicated my life to that boy. When James fell ill years later, I took on double shifts cleaning houses and sewing for neighbors just to afford his medication. David never once went without shoes, school books, or lunch money, even if it meant I had to skip meals now and then. I never told him, of course. Mothers lie with a smile. We say, "I already ate," or "I'm not tired," because we love them more than we love ourselves. By the time David was a teenager, the house had grown with us. 2 more rooms, a better roof, a garden out back where I grew snap beans and tomatoes. James and I spent our weekends sitting under the porch, watching the sunset bleed through the trees. David brought home friends who called me Miss Marjorie, and he'd proudly tell them, "My mom made those curtains," or "Dad built that fence." He didn't sound embarrassed back then. He sounded proud. I remember when he got into college, first in the family to go. I cried so hard I had to sit down. James held my hand and said, "That's our boy. You gave him wings, Marjorie." And I did. I packed care boxes for him every month. Socks, snacks, notes with scripture verses. He always called to say thank you. The first time he brought his college girlfriend home, the woman who would later become his wife, I greeted her with a warm meal and clean sheets. She was polite, smiled too much maybe, but I thought she was just nervous. "I hope you feel at home here," I said. She looked around and said, "It's quaint." That word sat wrong with me. Still, I brushed it off. After James passed, David was there for a time. He visited often, called me every Sunday, even fixed the back porch with a few of his old friends. I remember sitting out there with him one fall evening. The leaves were burning red and orange across the trees. He leaned his head on my shoulder and whispered, "You were always my home, Mom." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? Even when he suggested I move in permanently after he married. "So we can take care of you, Mom." I took it as a gesture of love. I gave him power of attorney not because I had to, but because I trusted him. Because I thought I mattered more than the paper trail. I moved into the home I'd built, now his by deed, thinking we were starting a new chapter. I brought my wedding china, my quilts, my photo albums. Little did I know those things would soon be shoved into boxes in the attic. There was no ceremony to the shift. It happened in quiet moments. A missing chair from the dining room. A photo of James replaced with a beach print. My teacups moved into the garage. I kept telling myself they're just making space. Still your home too. But even back then I think I knew something was slipping. My son didn't come to me for advice anymore. He didn't ask how I was sleeping or if I needed anything. He deferred to her, always to her. When I asked about a missing recipe book, he said, "She probably stored it for safety." When I noticed James's tools gone, he said, "They were rusted." Rust never stopped James. And neither should have I. The shift didn't come like a storm, loud and sudden. It came like a slow leak in the roof. A drip here. A stain there. And by the time you noticed the damage, the rot's already set in. It began with silence. Not the peaceful kind you share with someone you love. The heavy kind. The kind that fills a room when something's wrong and no one will say it. The kind that makes your skin itch. I remember one morning, early spring. I came down to make coffee. David and his wife, Vanessa, were already in the kitchen, whispering with their heads together like teenagers. I smiled like I always did. "Good morning," I said, reaching for the percolator. Vanessa gave me that tight, rehearsed smile of hers. "Oh, we already had coffee. We didn't know you were up." They used to wait for me. Even after I moved in with them, mornings were sacred. We'd talk about the news, the neighbors, laugh about nothing. Now it was like I had interrupted a meeting I wasn't invited to. I poured myself a cup anyway and sat at the table. David stood up after a minute. "We've got a contractor coming to look at the upstairs bathroom." "Oh," I asked, surprised. "What's wrong with it?" Vanessa answered instead. "We want to modernize the space. Make it more ours." I nodded, but something inside me went still. Ours. Not yours, not ours, not even David's childhood bathroom. Just theirs. That same week, the family photos that once lined the hallway disappeared. In their place, abstract art prints and coastal-themed canvases. One afternoon I asked Vanessa where she'd stored the old frames. She looked up from her phone and said, "Oh, I thought you'd taken them down." I hadn't. But I didn't argue. That became a pattern. Little things going missing, my embroidered towels, a recipe card from James's mother, the hand mirror I'd kept since our wedding. When I asked, Vanessa always looked confused and David looked tired. "You probably just misplaced it, Mom." I wasn't losing things. I was being erased. Then came the guest room, my room technically. At first, it was just redecorated. The floral quilt replaced with a gray duvet, the curtains changed. Then one day, I came home from the store and found my sewing machine gone. Packed away, I was told. "We want to use the room for a reading nook," Vanessa had said. "You can still sleep there, of course." I nodded again. But that night I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the bare walls, and I realized something painful. I no longer lived with them. I lived around them, and they were shrinking my space. David rarely looked me in the eye anymore. He was always busy, always distracted. And when I tried to talk to him, really talk, he'd say things like, "Let's not get into all that." Or "Vanessa's been stressed, try to be understanding." Understanding of what, exactly? That I was a burden now? The woman I once rocked to sleep beside my son had become the gatekeeper of the home I built. Every decision went through her. Every plan had her signature. David became smaller somehow, quieter around her, quicker to agree with whatever she said. I still cooked most dinners back then, part of the agreement when I moved in, but she'd started adding her own touches, correcting my spices, commenting on the old-fashioned methods I used. Once, she tossed out my cornbread and replaced it with a box mix before guests arrived. "It's just more consistent this way," she said. I bit my tongue so hard that night it bled. I'd raised a man who once stood up for bullied kids at school, who cried when our old dog passed, who used to bring me flowers from the side of the road. And now he just sat there as his wife reshaped our home like clay, flattening the parts that looked like me. There was one afternoon, I remember it too clearly, when I overheard them in the living room. I had just come back from my walk, and the door was slightly open. "She just lingers," Vanessa whispered. "I know she's your mom, but it's exhausting. I feel like I can't breathe in my own home." "She won't be around forever," David said. That broke something in me. I leaned back against the wall outside that door and let the weight of their words press into my ribs. She won't be around forever. It wasn't just thoughtless. It was calculation. Vanessa wasn't waiting for me to leave. She was waiting for me to disappear. And my son, my baby boy, had given her the timeline. I didn't cry. Not then. I went upstairs, sat in that cold, gray guest room and pulled out a shoebox from the closet. Inside were old letters James had written me during his illness when he feared leaving me alone. In one he said, "If the day ever comes where you feel unwelcome in our home, fight. Not with fists but with truth. You earned every brick in that foundation." He always knew how to see through the storm. That night, as I folded the letter back into its envelope, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not be erased. I might be small. I might be older. But I was not powerless. Not yet. It was a Sunday afternoon in June, hot, sticky, and loud with the kind of summer laughter that used to fill me with pride. Vanessa had organized a backyard barbecue for David's colleagues from work. She said it was a networking mixer. But to me it felt like a performance. New grill, matching patio furniture, string lights she insisted on hanging herself. None of it looked like home. I offered to help, of course. I always did. I marinated chicken, baked a peach cobbler from scratch, set out the lemonade like I used to for church potlucks. But when the guests began arriving, Vanessa came into the kitchen and said, "You don't need to worry about serving. Just enjoy yourself, okay?" Sounded kind, but the way she touched my elbow, firm, directing me out of the kitchen, told me she didn't mean it. I wandered outside and tried to mingle, but I didn't recognize most of the people. They were young, polished, loud with wine and small talk. David was in the corner, laughing too hard at someone's joke. Vanessa stood in the center of the yard like a hostess at a high-end inn, smiling with all her teeth. Then I heard her say it. Someone asked about the house, complimented the garden I think, and she replied, "Oh yes, we finally made it ours last year. Took some legal work, but it was worth it." She smiled like she'd won something. The man nodded, impressed. "Hard to believe this whole property's yours." Vanessa took a sip of her drink and said, "Yep, ours completely. No ties, no strings." I stopped breathing for a moment. No ties. No strings. It wasn't just a comment. It was a public declaration. One made in the house I had scrubbed, planted, paid for, prayed over. I felt like the earth tilted beneath me. I turned and walked slowly back into the house, gripping the railing as I climbed the stairs to the guest room. I sat on the edge of the bed, stared at my hands, still slightly damp from washing dishes. My fingers, knotted with age, had once buttoned David's shirts, patched his pants, traced his fevered forehead. Those same fingers now felt unwelcome in my own kitchen. I sat there for a long time, until the sky outside turned gold with evening. From the window I watched as guests filtered out, waving their goodbyes. Vanessa's laugh rang out again, and I noticed how David stood just behind her, like a shadow, present but fading. A soft knock came on the doorframe. It was Vanessa. "Hey," she said. "You disappeared. Everything okay?" I turned my head slowly. "I heard what you said out there." Her expression flickered just for a second. Then she smiled again, tight and polite. "Oh, that? I just meant we finally got through the refinancing process. You know, with David's promotion and all. It's just paperwork, really." I didn't say a word. She shifted. "I didn't mean anything by it." "No strings," I said softly. "That's what you said." Her smile dropped. "Look, I don't know what you want me to say, Marjorie. We're trying to build our life. You're still here, aren't you?" I stood slowly, my knees aching. "Yes. For now." She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic." And just like that, she turned and left, as if the conversation was a loose thread she'd snipped off a dress. Later that evening, I tried to talk to David. He was in the den watching something on his laptop. I stood in the doorway, unsure of how to even begin. "I heard what Vanessa said today," I finally said. "At the party." He didn't look up right away. When he did, his eyes were tired. "What about it?" "You let her tell people this house doesn't have any ties. Like I'm not here. Like I never was." He sighed, set the laptop aside. "Mom, she was just talking casually. People don't need our family history every time they ask about the garden." "It's not history, David. It's my life. My name was on this house before you could walk." He stood up. "And you signed it over. Voluntarily. Remember?" My stomach dropped. "I thought we were a family," I said. "I thought you wanted me here." "I do," he said quickly, then added. "But it's complicated." There it was. The word people use when they don't want to say you're in the way. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply walked out of the room and closed the door behind me. The next few days were a quiet kind of hell. Vanessa avoided me completely, and David, my David, became a stranger with careful smiles and half-finished conversations. The air in the house felt thick, like something sacred had broken and no one knew how to fix it. The final blow came in the form of silence. One evening, I overheard a conversation, this time not whispered, not hidden. David said, "She's still going through the medicine cabinet." I told her we needed space, and she just pretended not to hear me. Vanessa replied, "Well, it's her pattern. She doesn't know how to not insert herself. Maybe we should just move. Get somewhere new." Or, Vanessa said coldly, "Maybe she should." That night I sat on the edge of my bed, hands in my lap, and stared at the wall. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was something deeper. I was finished pretending this was still home. It was the folder that gave them away. Not a fight. Not an insult, not even a locked door. Just a simple black folder left on the edge of the dining table one afternoon. While Vanessa stepped out to walk the dog and David was upstairs fiddling with that sound system he always insisted we didn't need. I wasn't snooping. I'd gone in to open the curtains and water the houseplant, the one they always forgot, and there it was, bold as daylight. Property development proposal. Wyndham and Company. My hand hovered over it for a long time. Something in me knew. Before I touched it, before I flipped it open, I knew whatever I found inside would change everything. And it did. Inside were pages of typed documents, valuation estimates, landscaping projections, potential selling prices. But what made my stomach twist was the highlighted sentence on page 3. Proposed sale of 31 Huntington Drive. Pending senior occupant relocation or agreement to vacate. Senior occupant. That was me. My name wasn't on the header, nor in the recipient box. There was no note to me, no mention of a conversation we'd had, because we hadn't. This wasn't a plan with me. This was a plan around me. Or worse, against me. I flipped to the back where a list of next steps sat cleanly outlined. One of them read, "Consult elder care facilities in surrounding areas, priority. Discretion." I felt my knees weaken. It wasn't just cold. It was premeditated. Planned. My own son and his wife were quietly arranging my exit like I was a problem to be solved. Not a mother. Not even a person. Just an obstacle standing in the way of their next chapter. I carried the folder upstairs like it might explode in my hands. Inside the room, no, not a room, my room once, I sat down hard and opened the drawer where I kept James's letters. I needed to feel close to him. I needed his voice, even if it was just ink on fading paper. I found the letter he wrote when he first got sick, when we still thought he might have more time. It said, "Marjorie, if you ever feel you're being pushed aside, don't sit down. You're not furniture. You're the foundation. And if they ever forget that, remind them who poured the concrete." Tears slipped down my cheeks then, quiet and hot. I wasn't a weak woman. I had scrubbed this house top to bottom for 40 years. I had paid bills when James could no longer work. I had buried my husband and raised our son and smiled through grief with pies in the oven. And now I was just in the way? I didn't confront them that night. I didn't have the words yet. But I started watching differently. Listening more carefully. Every look between them. Every text Vanessa typed when I entered the room. Every envelope she slipped into her purse without opening. 2 days later I found the second piece of proof. This time in the recycling bin. A crumpled brochure for Sunvale Transitional Living, Dignity, Care, Comfort. They hadn't even bothered to hide it. I picked it up with trembling hands. There was a circled number at the top. A date jotted beside it. I knew that handwriting. It was David's. I felt something hollow crack open inside me. This wasn't concern. This wasn't them trying to help or plan for the future. This was them removing me. Replacing me with glossy catalog promises and wide, empty rooms filled with strangers. I could almost hear Vanessa saying it now. She'll have more people her age there. It's better for everyone. I went to my closet, pulled down a small lockbox I hadn't touched in years. Inside were papers James and I had kept, deed copies, tax records, even an old legal document from when we refinanced the house back in '96. And at the very bottom, folded into quarters, was the power of attorney form David had asked me to sign when James passed. He'd said, Just in case anything happens, Mom. You don't need the stress. I trusted him. I didn't read it line by line. Now I did. And what I found made my blood run cold. It wasn't temporary. It wasn't limited. It granted him full authority over finances, over property, over medical decisions. I hadn't handed him trust. I'd handed him control. I sat there for hours that night, the lockbox open on the bed, the folder beside it, the brochure crumpled at my feet. The room felt like it was tilting, like the air was getting thinner by the minute. And still, even then, I didn't scream. I didn't storm into their room. I just sat with it. Because now I knew. This wasn't about making space. It wasn't about adapting to new routines. It wasn't even about differences in lifestyle. This was about removal. A clean, quiet erasure. I wasn't going to let that happen. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. I waited 3 days before I said anything. 3 days of moving through that house like a ghost, hearing the same laughter, the same casual clinks of wine glasses and forks, but knowing every sound was tainted now, touched by the rot of betrayal. I smiled when Vanessa passed me in the hallway. I made breakfast just like I always did. But inside, something had settled in my chest like a stone. It was the morning after Vanessa's birthday dinner, when I finally reached my limit. She'd invited a dozen friends over. I wasn't asked to join, just to help serve. I did. Quietly, without complaint. I even baked her favorite lemon cake. She thanked me with a strained smile and a nod like I was the help. When the last guest left, she turned to David and said, "Maybe next year we can host in a bigger space, something more modern." He kissed her cheek and replied, "We'll figure it out soon." I went to bed that night without saying a word. But I didn't sleep. The next morning I walked into the kitchen just as David was pouring coffee. "We need to talk," I said, and my voice didn't shake. He turned surprised. "Sure. What's up?" I held the folder, the one they thought I hadn't seen, in both hands. I placed it gently on the counter between us. He stared at it, didn't touch it. "You left this out last week," I said. "I read it." His eyes flicked up to mine, then quickly away. "Mom." "Don't lie to me," I said, sharper than I intended. "I've changed your diapers and buried your father. I know your voice when you're about to lie." He sighed and leaned against the counter. "It's just a proposal. Nothing's final." But it was hidden. "I didn't want to upset you." I leaned in. "You mean you didn't want me to stop you?" Vanessa walked in just then, still in her robe. She stopped mid-step, sensing the tension instantly. I turned to her. "Did you think I wouldn't find out? That I'd just slip out of here quietly like an old piece of furniture you didn't want anymore?" She scoffed, arms folding. "Don't make this dramatic." "No," I said. "Let's call it what it is. You were planning to move me into a care facility so you could sell this house. The house I built brick by brick with my husband." David ran a hand through his hair. "Mom, it's not that simple. We were just looking at options." "For who?" I snapped. "Because none of those options included me." They both stared at me like I'd grown another head. For a moment I saw my son. Not the man standing there now, but the boy who used to cry when I was late picking him up from school. The boy who used to bring me dandelions clutched in muddy hands. And then I saw that boy fade completely. Vanessa broke the silence. "Look, you've been living here without paying rent for 3 years. We've made changes, adjustments, compromises." "Rent?" I repeated, stunned. David stepped forward. "She just means." "No," I cut in. "Let her finish." Vanessa didn't back down. "We've given you space, meals, care. And now we're trying to build a life, a real life. And that means we need full ownership of the space." I blinked slowly. "You think I'm an obligation? A burden?" Vanessa shrugged. "You said it." David's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He didn't defend me. Not once. That's when I knew I wasn't reaching a limit. I had passed it. That afternoon, I walked 2 blocks to visit Mrs. Jennings, our neighbor and widow who still made the best peach preserves in the county. We hadn't spoken much recently, but she opened the door like she'd been waiting for me. She looked me over, nodded once, and said, "Come in, Marjorie." I sat at her kitchen table, my fingers wrapped around a chipped teacup, and told her everything. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she leaned back, folded her arms, and said, Well, you're gonna need a lawyer. I was hoping you'd say that, I whispered. Turns out her nephew was a family lawyer. Quiet, sharp, and thorough. By that Friday I had a consultation booked. I brought every paper I could find. The deed copies, the power of attorney form, James's letters, the documents I'd scanned from the folder. I told him everything, and when I was done he looked at me and said, "They may have moved fast, but they didn't move smart." I learned that I still had legal options. The deed had changed hands, but there were irregularities. Rushed filings, missing disclosures, even questionable signatures. Elder financial abuse laws were on my side if I wanted to pursue it. And I did. But more than anything, I wanted my dignity back. I walked home that day taller. Vanessa was in the living room, typing on her laptop. David was at the sink. I didn't say a word to either of them. I just walked upstairs, shut the door, and began packing up every letter, every document, every memory that still mattered. The reckoning had begun. The lawyer's office smelled like dust and old books, the kind of place where lives quietly change and families silently fracture. His name was Mitchell Lang. He wasn't flashy or overly talkative, which I liked. His office was small, tucked between a bakery and a dance studio in the older part of town. When I stepped inside, holding a manila envelope close to my chest like it contained my last breath, he stood and offered his hand with a quiet nod. "I've looked through everything you sent," he said, motioning for me to sit. "And I think you're making the right decision." I didn't speak for a moment. I looked down at my hands, the knuckles swollen now, skin thin and freckled. These hands had cooked thousands of meals, stitched hundreds of hems, wiped tears from cheeks that once called me mama. "I never thought I'd have to write a will like this," I whispered. "Not against my own son." Mitchell leaned forward. "It's not against anyone. It's for you. For your peace." That word again. Peace. He explained the details carefully, slow, respectful. The updated will would leave my remaining assets to a trust in my name. If it were contested by anyone named in the previous version, namely David, the assets would automatically go to charity. A no contest clause, he called it. Clean. Final. Powerful. He even offered to serve as executor, should I prefer a neutral party. But I already had someone in mind. "My granddaughter," I said. "Emily. She's 23. She doesn't say much at family dinners, but she always hugs me like she means it." He smiled. "That's reason enough." Signing the papers felt strange, like sealing a box you once filled with hope, and placing it on a high shelf you know you'll never reach again. But there was no turning back. Not anymore. When I placed the pen down, Mitchell handed me a copy and said, "You just protected your legacy, Marjorie. That's something people wait too long to do." I nodded. "It's not just the money. It's the house." "The house. They're planning to sell it," I said. "Once I'm gone, or preferably before." He nodded. "We can add a clause for that too. I'll help you protect what's yours." As I left his office, the sunlight hit my face with a warmth I hadn't felt in weeks. I stood on the sidewalk and took a deep breath. It was the first one that didn't taste like grief. The next day I went into town and made 2 more stops. First, to the county records office, where I requested copies of the original house plans James and I had submitted in the 80s. The woman behind the counter took one look at the faded photo I brought with me. James standing on our half-built porch in a flannel shirt, hammer in hand, and smiled. "We'll find it." Second, I went to the church. Not for a sermon. Just for the silence. I sat in the second pew from the front, staring at the stained glass window of the Good Shepherd. I used to sit there every Sunday beside James and then alone, and now I wasn't sure where I belonged. But I knew I wasn't done. After a long while I whispered aloud, "I did what you told me, James. I fought. Quietly. But I fought." I left the church that afternoon lighter than I arrived. Back home, Vanessa was in the garage sorting through boxes. I watched her from the porch for a moment, the way she held up old photo albums like they were debris, not history. Like she was planning a life that didn't include memory. David pulled into the driveway minutes later. He stepped out of his car and looked at me like he wanted to say something, but didn't. He just nodded and walked inside. Let him stay silent, I thought. Let him watch. Inside, I took the newly signed will and placed it in the bottom drawer of my dresser, under James's letters. I wasn't hiding it. I was storing it somewhere sacred. Somewhere mine. That night, as I sat on my bed and folded laundry, Emily knocked softly and peeked in. "Grandma!" I smiled genuinely. "Come in, sweetheart." She sat beside me, pulled one of my cardigans into her lap. "Dad said you've been upset." I looked at her closely. "Do you think I have a right to be?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." That one word filled the room with more comfort than a dozen hugs. I reached over, opened the drawer, and handed her the second copy of my will. "Read it when you're ready," I said. "And hold on to it just in case." She took it eyes wide but didn't argue. "Does this mean you're leaving?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. "No, baby. It means I'm staying. But on my terms." It was a Tuesday when the final line was crossed. I remember because I just finished folding linens in the laundry room when I heard unfamiliar voices drifting in from the front yard. Chipper, professional, practiced. Real estate voices. I opened the front door and saw them. A man and a woman in tailored suits, holding glossy folders and measuring tapes. Vanessa stood at the porch rail, smiling like a hostess giving a tour. David was beside her, arms crossed, silent. I stepped onto the porch and said, "Can I help you?" The woman turned to me, confused at first, then smiled. "Oh, you must be Marjorie. We're from Crescent and Bloom Realty. Just here to take a few measurements for the preliminary listing." "Listing?" I repeated. Vanessa's expression didn't shift. "We're just seeing what the place is worth." I stared at her. "Without telling me?" She raised a brow. "It's not your decision, is it?" David cleared his throat. "Mom, don't." "No," I said firmly, stepping between them and the front door. "You don't bring strangers into my home without so much as a heads up. And you certainly don't measure it for sale like I'm already gone." Vanessa's smile flattened. "You're making a scene." "I'm drawing a boundary." The realtor stood awkwardly, looking from one face to another. I looked at them and said clearly, "The property is under legal review. If I were you, I wouldn't touch a single wall." They exchanged nervous glances. The man stammered, "We'll reschedule." "Sorry for the confusion." They left. And for the first time, I didn't follow the conflict with retreat. I turned to Vanessa and David, heart pounding, and said, "This house is still mine in ways you'll never understand." Vanessa crossed her arms. "You don't even have your name on the deed. And you don't have your name on my legacy." She scoffed. "You're being delusional." I walked past her and into the house, slamming the door behind me with a force that surprised even me. Upstairs, I found my storage box open. My old Bible was lying on top, as if someone had been going through it. Not neatly, not with reverence. Tossed like clutter. I opened it. Inside was a photograph of James, folded in half, the crease right through his eyes. That did it. The woman I used to be, quiet, forgiving, endlessly patient, finally stepped aside. What took her place was older, stronger, sharper. A woman who remembered every mortgage payment made while James was sick. Every dinner skipped so David could have new cleats. Every night she sat up alone with tears in her lap and no one to thank her. I called Mitchell, my lawyer, that night and told him I wanted to move forward with everything. Contest the deed transfer. Freeze the potential sale. File the necessary documents under elder financial manipulation. He agreed and assured me we had more than enough cause. But more than legal action, I needed to prepare emotionally. Because once the storm began, it wouldn't be kind. Over the next week, I gathered what mattered. James's letters, old family photos, the quilt his mother stitched for our wedding. The rest, the furniture, the dishes, the art on the walls, could burn for all I cared. Vanessa stopped speaking to me completely. David barely made eye contact. The silence in the house thickened until even the creak of the floorboards felt tense. But I stayed still. Strong. Focused. Then came the envelope. It arrived one morning, slid under my bedroom door while I was in the shower. No knock. No explanation. Just a plain white envelope sealed and heavy. Inside was a typed letter. No greeting. No warmth. It read, "We believe it would be in everyone's best interest if you began looking into alternative housing arrangements. We are happy to assist with moving costs and placement if necessary. The home is no longer suited to your needs." There was a brochure clipped to the back. Another care facility more expensive than the last. Glossy pictures of smiling seniors playing cards. And a check for $5,000. $5,000 to erase me. I walked downstairs, found David at the breakfast counter, and placed the envelope beside his coffee. He looked at it, then up at me. We're just trying to make things easier. Easier for who? I asked. He didn't answer. I said, you gave up your soul for peace and got neither. I won't make the same mistake. I didn't need to shout. My calm was louder than any rage could be. I walked back upstairs, packed the last of my papers, and locked the bedroom door behind me. That night, I slept fully dressed, the documents in a folder under my pillow. The time for silence had ended. The family dinner was supposed to be intimate. Vanessa's word. Just close friends and relatives, she said. They had rented a small banquet room at their favorite Italian place downtown. The same one where James and I used to take David for spaghetti when he got straight A's. I wasn't invited. Not directly. But I heard them talking about it. Vanessa checking RSVPs, David calling the restaurant about vegetarian options for one of her cousins. They said nothing to me. So I picked out my best coat, navy wool with gold buttons, and walked through that door like I belonged. Because I did. The chatter died down when I stepped in. Eyes turned. Forks hovered midair. David stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. Mom, he said, trying to mask his panic. What are you? I'm here for dinner, I replied, smooth as silk. Vanessa's face tightened. This was meant to be private. Nothing involving the sale of my house is private, I said. Not anymore. I walked slowly to the front of the table. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. I looked at the guests, people I'd seen at weddings, holidays, baby showers. Some of them had hugged me. A few had even cried beside me when James passed. Now they just stared. I won't take much of your time, I said. But since you're all here, I'd like to clarify a few things. I placed the folder on the table. Not a thick one, just enough papers to make the point. I flipped it open, turned to the page Mitchell had marked in yellow, and read. There is significant concern regarding the power of attorney transfer executed under emotional duress and without full disclosure. Vanessa scoffed. This is absurd. I held up a hand. Furthermore, I continued, evidence suggests the planned sale of the property includes deliberate concealment from the original homeowner, including attempts to forcibly relocate said homeowner under the guise of care. David tried to interrupt, but his voice cracked. Mom, you're making this public? You made it public the moment you let strangers measure the walls I built, I replied. You made it public when you slipped brochures under my door like eviction notices. Vanessa stood now, her tone sharp. This is a family matter. You're humiliating everyone. I turned to her, calm as still water. You humiliated yourself when you forgot that roofs aren't just wood and nails, they're memories, promises, sacrifices, and you tried to sell it like it was just another listing. I looked at the table, scanning each face. Do any of you know who paid the first mortgage on that house? Who built the fence? Who laid the tile with bleeding knees and an aching back? Silence. I did, I said. With James. Before David ever learned to ride a bike. I pulled out the sign will next. I've updated everything. The will. The trust. The property filings. Contest it and everything goes to charity. Not a penny to either of you. Vanessa's mouth fell open. David stepped toward me, his voice trembling. Why are you doing this? Because you already did, I said. You just didn't think I'd fight back. The room was dead quiet. Even the clinking of glasses had stopped. People stared, unsure where to look. I gathered the papers, slid them back into my folder, and turned to leave. But just before I reached the door, I paused. James used to say a house isn't a home until it holds both joy and pain. Well, I've seen enough of both now to say, it's still mine. I left the room without another word. Behind me, the hush remained. I don't know who stayed or who left. I don't care. That night, I sat on the porch in the dark, alone. The cicadas buzzed and the sky was clear. I felt grief, yes, but not regret. Never regret. The next morning, David knocked on my door. I opened it but didn't move aside. I wanted to say sorry, he said. But I know that's not enough. No, I said, voice low. It's not. Vanessa never spoke to me again. Not a text. Not a call. I didn't expect one. And I didn't need it. I had reclaimed more than a house. I had reclaimed my voice. Do you think the mother made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The house was quiet after that. Not peaceful, not yet, but quiet in a way that felt like a wound closing, tender and raw. David and Vanessa didn't move out immediately. They stayed out of obligation, I suppose, or maybe denial. But they avoided me. Meals were silent. Days passed with barely a glance exchanged. She stopped using the living room altogether. He spent most of his time in the garage, tinkering with things that didn't need fixing. I didn't mind the quiet. It gave me time to think. I spent hours sitting on the back porch, staring at the garden James once planted. The rows were overgrown now, wild with weeds. But here and there, a stubborn tomato plant still clung to life. I liked that, the small silent resilience of things people forget. The neighbors had started whispering. One afternoon, Mrs. Green from next door came by with a peach pie. She didn't ask for details, just placed the dish in my hands and said, "Good for you." I smiled, thanked her, and placed it in the fridge. That night I ate it alone with a cup of hot tea. Not needing company, just comfort. I took long walks in the evenings, past the church, the school where David once played soccer, the tree we carved our initials into when we first moved in. People waved. Some nodded politely. Others cautiously. The town didn't know which side to take, I think. But I didn't care about sides. I cared about truth. One morning as I was watering the front flower beds, a car pulled up to the curb. Emily stepped out, hair pulled back, wearing jeans and one of those oversized college sweaters. She didn't say anything at first. Just walked over, picked up the second watering can, and began helping me. After a few minutes she said, "I heard about the dinner." I didn't look at her. "You must have heard plenty." She hesitated. "Dad's upset. Says you humiliated him." I stopped watering. "And what do you think?" She set the can down. "I think you finally did what nobody else had the courage to do." That cracked something open in me. I turned to her and asked, "Do you remember when I used to read to you in the living room? The way you always curled into my side, even when you were too big for it?" She nodded. "Every Friday night. You never missed one." I smiled. That's the part they forgot. The part one won't let them erase. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in weeks. Pride. She pulled an envelope from her bag. I printed the final will. "In case you want a physical backup." I took it from her, my fingers brushing hers. "You're a good girl, Emily." She blinked fast, then hugged me tight and long. I let myself be held. After she left, I sat on the porch and looked through the papers again. This time I didn't feel fear. I felt clarity. I wasn't mourning the house anymore. I was planning its next life. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling James once repaired after a leak. I remembered how he cursed at the water stains, how I held the flashlight while he hammered, how we laughed when the ladder nearly tipped and he yelled, "Catch me, Marge!" Like I could have caught a grown man with my arms alone. That ceiling still held his sweat. This house still held his love. And I finally knew what I needed to do. The idea came like a whisper. Not loud, not sudden, just a gentle thought that settled in and refused to leave. I was sitting on the porch with my coffee, watching the sun come up through the trees when I saw her, Mrs. Carlyle, walking slowly with her cane along the sidewalk. She'd lost her husband last winter and had been on her own since. No children. No visitors. Just her and that little blue house with the peeling paint. She paused when she saw me, raised a hand. I waved back. Something in her eyes looked hollow. That was the moment. I thought, what if this house could mean something again? What if it could help the ones nobody checks on? Later that day, I drove into town and stopped by the community center. The director, Janice, was a woman I'd known through church circles. She'd always been the sort who got things done: fundraisers, soup kitchens, coat drives. I told her what I was thinking. A place for women like me, I said. Widows. Seniors. Women who don't want to die alone in silence. She blinked. You mean like a group home? I shook my head. No. A home. Not a facility. A home. They'll help around the house, keep the garden, share meals. Nothing formal. Just a roof and kindness. She smiled slowly. You'd be surprised how many women could use that. She gave me names, people I could talk to, organizations that might donate furniture, a small grant program I might apply for. I took notes in the back of a grocery receipt and left feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Back at home, I pulled out the old blueprint of the house. James had drawn it years ago when we were thinking of adding a second story. It had his handwriting in the corners, little notes like, add skylight for Marge's morning light, and pantry shelf lower for easier reach. I pressed my fingers over the pencil marks. He'd always thought of me in the details. The next day I called Mitchell and told him my plan. Once the legal process is complete, I said, I want the house transferred into a trust, one that can't be sold or inherited. It stays a home for women who need it, for as long as I live. And maybe longer. He paused. You sure about that? I've never been more sure. I began making lists. What needed to be cleared? What could stay? Which rooms could be converted? I imagined the den as a shared library, the guest room as a sewing space. The attic had enough space for a reading nook, maybe even a futon. Vanessa started noticing the changes. She said nothing, but her glances lingered. One morning she saw me carrying out old curtains and asked, What are you doing? Making space, I said. For what? For people who know how to treat a home. She didn't respond. Just turned and walked away. David, to his credit, didn't argue. He seemed tired, worn down by the weight of everything he'd allowed. One evening I caught him standing in the living room, looking at the fireplace. I thought he might speak, but he didn't. That was fine. I didn't need his permission. I began calling women from the church, from the senior center, from old social clubs. I spoke with Martha, who'd lost her husband 3 years ago and whose landlord had just raised her rent. I met Nora, 71, who had no family nearby and was scared to live alone after a fall in her bathroom. They were cautious at first. Unsure. Who opens their home just like that? But I told them the truth. I'm not offering charity, I said. I'm offering a kitchen table, a cup of coffee, and a place where your name isn't forgotten. One by one they said yes. Emily visited often now. She helped me clean, rearrange, take measurements. She made flyers for Marjorie's house, as we started calling it, soft blue paper with gentle script that said, a place for women who remember what it means to care. Inquire within. We posted one at the community board in the library, and another at the church. The first day I saw someone take a photo of it, I cried. Happy tears this time. Every night before bed, I opened James's letter. The one he wrote when he was too sick to speak but still thinking of me. Keep building, Marge, it read. You were always the builder. I just held the tools. Now I wasn't just building rooms. I was building something better. The first woman to move in was Nora. She arrived on a gray Wednesday morning with 2 worn suitcases and a single potted plant. Her eyes were nervous, scanning the porch, the windows, the threshold, like she was waiting to be turned away. But I opened the door wide and said, Welcome home. She cried right there in the hallway. A week later came Martha, with a jar of her famous apple butter and a stack of well-worn crossword books. Then Gloria, who'd recently lost her partner and said she just wanted a place where someone noticed when I didn't come down for breakfast. We weren't a facility. We weren't a program. We were just women who'd been left behind, trying to make something beautiful out of what remained. The house, once heavy with tension, came alive again. Every morning, someone brewed the coffee before I even got to the kitchen. The scent of toast and old stories filled the air. We cooked together, cleaned together, sat in the sunroom and read books aloud. On Wednesdays we played cards. On Sundays we took turns making something sweet, banana bread, lemon bars, peach cobbler. It wasn't perfect. We bickered over thermostat settings, music choices, who forgot to replace the toilet paper roll. But it was honest. And it was ours. Vanessa moved out a month after Martha arrived. She said nothing to me. Just packed her things into a sleek rental car and drove off one morning without a goodbye. David stood in the driveway for a long time after, staring at nothing. I watched him from the porch. He looked older than I remembered. Not in years but in weight, like the guilt had finally started to settle where it belonged. He didn't leave right away. He stayed in the guest room for a few more weeks, quieter than I'd ever known him to be. We passed each other in the hall, in the kitchen, on the stairs, never speaking, never looking too long. But he saw. He saw how the house pulsed with warmth now, how it echoed with laughter that didn't demand anything in return, how women who had nothing in common but grief found comfort in shared soup and stories. He saw what real family looked like. One afternoon, I found a note tucked under the teapot. I never understood what this house meant until I saw it through their eyes. I'm sorry I tried to take it. I'm sorry I let her. It wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting. I didn't write back. Not yet. But I left the note in the drawer where the sugar spoons go, and every morning after that, he took his coffee without a word, just a small nod in my direction. Emily visited twice a week. She helped me sort donations, furniture, books, warm blankets. She interviewed applicants, helped Nora set up a small website, even arranged for a retired yoga teacher to offer chair classes on Saturdays. One afternoon, she and I sat on the porch, feet propped up, sipping lemonade. You know, she said, this house feels different now. It is, I said. It's finally mine again. Not on paper, in spirit. She smiled. I think Grandpa would be proud. I looked out at the garden, now freshly weeded and blooming again. I think he's here, I said. In the laughter. In the walls. And he was. In every creak of the floorboard, in every rustle of curtain. In the nails he hammered and the prayers he whispered. In me. One evening we had a potluck on the back porch, 6 women, 2 neighbors, Emily and even David, who stayed on the edge but accepted a plate of casserole when offered. Martha told a story that made Gloria spit her sweet tea. Nora led a hymn when the sun began to set. Emily lit candles on the railing. When it got dark, we sat in a circle, full and tired and warm. I haven't laughed like that in years, Nora whispered. I haven't felt this scene in decades, Gloria added. I looked at them, my chosen family, and said, blood makes a family, but love keeps it together. David sat quietly listening, and for the first time he didn't look like a stranger. He looked like someone finally beginning to understand. He didn't speak that night, but before he left, he touched my shoulder and said, thank you for not turning me out. I looked him in the eye. That was never mine to do, but now you know how it feels. He nodded. That was enough. That night, as I cleaned the dishes beside Martha, she nudged me and said, this place, it's magic. No, I replied, drawing a plate. It's just what happens when you fill a house with heart instead of hate. It had been nearly 6 months since Vanessa left. David had stayed in town but moved into a small apartment near his office. He came by occasionally, mostly to bring Emily or drop off something he'd found in storage. Our conversations were polite, careful, like 2 people learning to speak a language they used to know. I didn't expect to see Vanessa again. I thought I'd made peace with that. But one rainy afternoon in early spring, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find her standing there, soaked to the bone in a beige trench coat, hair pulled back, makeup smudged from the weather. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, just deflated. May I come in? She asked. I paused. Part of me wanted to shut the door. Not out of anger, I'd burned through most of that, but because I was afraid of what seeing her again might stir up. Still, I stepped aside. Briefly. She entered slowly, eyes darting around. The house looked different now, warm and lived in again. There were Afghans draped over chairs, puzzle books on the coffee table, laughter trailing from the back hall where Gloria was helping Nora with the groceries. Vanessa turned to me. This isn't what I expected. What did you expect? She sighed. I don't know. Bitterness. Emptiness. Maybe for you to be alone. I didn't flinch. You'd have preferred that. She looked down. I came to apologize. I waited. I was wrong, she said. About the house. About you. About everything. I walked to the counter, poured myself a cup of tea. It's not about wrong or right anymore. It's about respect. You didn't have any for me then. She nodded, eyes welling up. I know. I thought I was protecting David, helping him move forward. But I was pushing you out because, honestly, I didn't know where I fit. You two had a bond one couldn't understand. I leaned against the counter, watching her. So you tried to cut it. She didn't deny it. I thought if I erased your presence, I could build something new in its place. But that house was never mine to shape. It was yours. Always. I sipped my tea. You're not the first to mistake control for love. She looked up then. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just needed to say it. Out loud. Silence settled between us. Then she added, I saw the website. Marjorie's house. What you've done here. It's beautiful. I didn't smile. But I didn't harden either. People think when you get older you fade, I said. That you stop becoming. But that's when you start becoming who you were meant to be, finally unafraid. She nodded, wiped at her eyes. Do you hate me? No, I said honestly. I don't think about you enough to hate you. She flinched at that, but she didn't argue. I just wanted you to know I'm leaving town, she said. Starting over. Somewhere quieter. Good, I replied. We all deserve a fresh start. Eventually. She looked around once more, then took a step toward the door. Before she left, she turned and said, David misses you. He won't say it, but he does. I didn't answer. I just opened the door. She paused, looking at me one last time. Goodbye, Marjorie. And then she was gone. I stood there for a moment, letting the cool air settle around me. Then I walked to the dining room, where Emily was laying out plates for that evening's meal. Guess who stopped by? I said. She looked up. Vanessa. I nodded. Emily bit her lip. How do you feel? Lighter, I said. Like a door finally closed, soft and quiet. She walked over and hugged me without a word. That night, as we sat around the table, 6 of us now, plus 2 visitors from the senior center, I looked at the faces around me. Women with lines on their cheeks, silver in their hair, stories in their eyes. People who had known love and loss, kindness and cruelty. People who had been forgotten, until they weren't. This was my family now. Not by blood. Not by obligation. By choice. By love. Would you have let her in? Or was she right to protect her peace? Let us know in the comments. The sun was shining the day we officially opened Marjorie's house. Not the pale, hesitant sun of winter, but the bold kind, warm and full, stretching its fingers over every flower bed, porch rail, and fresh coat of paint we had spent weeks perfecting. The air buzzed with quiet excitement. Folding chairs lined the front lawn. A banner hung across the porch rail in hand-painted letters. A home for the heart. Neighbors came. Church friends. The mayor's assistant even showed up with a plaque. But it wasn't about speeches or cameras. It was about legacy. About reclaiming something that had nearly been taken. Emily stood next to me, holding a clipboard and directing arrivals like she'd been born for it. She had on one of James's old flannel shirts tied at the waist, a little tribute no one else noticed but me. She caught me staring and smiled. You ready? She asked. As I'll ever be. I stepped onto the porch, looked out at the crowd, maybe 50 people, maybe more. I cleared my throat, feeling James's ghost beside me like a steadying hand. Thank you all for coming. I began. Some of you know this house. Some of you remember it when it was just studs and dust. And some of you are just meeting it for the first time. Either way, welcome. The crowd hushed. This house was built with love, I continued. Not just in its walls but in its years. It held birthday parties, late-night arguments, prayers whispered in the dark. It held grief, and joy, and everything in between. I paused, let the air settle. But somewhere along the way, people forgot what a home really is. They mistook it for a possession, a prize, something to be bought, flipped, sold. And I almost lost it. Not to strangers but to people I once trusted. Murmurs moved through the crowd. But I didn't waver. I don't tell you that for pity. I tell you because too many people our age, widows, elders, women, get pushed out of their own stories. And I decided not to let that happen to me. There was a beat of silence, then light applause. This house now belongs to something bigger than me. It belongs to every woman who needs to feel useful again. To feel safe. To feel seen. This is not a care home. This is not a shelter. This is a place where forgotten women find their second chapter. The applause grew stronger. I smiled, but not for the audience, for James. When the ceremony ended, we gave tours. The bedrooms were modest, filled with handmade quilts, cozy lamps and bookshelves lined with shared titles. The living room had a new couch, donated by a local furniture shop, and the fireplace mantel held framed photos of the current residents, including one of all of us laughing over a ruined meatloaf. Even the garden looked like it was smiling. Flowers bloomed in every corner. Emily had helped carve a small wooden sign that read, James and Marjorie's Garden, Planted in Love. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, we sat in the backyard with cups of warm cider, watching the sun sink behind the trees. I think we did it, Emily whispered. I nodded. We're just getting started. Gloria leaned back in her chair. You know, I never thought I'd live with roommates at 72. But this feels more like family than my own kids ever did. Martha chuckled. That's because no one here is pretending. We're all exactly who we are. Nora raised her glass. To chosen family. We all clinked mugs. David arrived quietly just before sunset. He didn't walk up the path right away. Just stood at the gate watching. Eventually he stepped through and walked over to me. Looks like the house is full again, he said softly. It is, I replied. But there's always room at the table. Just not like before. He nodded, eyes lowered. I came to say thank you. For not hating me. For doing something good with what I nearly ruined. I studied him. He looked like a man who had learned a lesson, not through punishment but through watching what grace really looks like. I'm glad you came, I said. But I didn't do this for you. I know. We didn't hug. But we didn't need to. That night, I sat in the old rocking chair by the window, wrapped in one of James's sweaters, a journal on my lap. I wrote a letter, to no one in particular. If someone finds this long after I'm gone, know that this house was more than walls. It was memory. It was fire and forgiveness. It was built by hands that shook but never stopped. If you're sitting in this room wondering where to go next, you've already arrived. You belong here. Just as I did. Marjorie. I tucked the letter into the bottom drawer of the hallway desk, just in case. And then I turned off the light, and let the house exhale into the quiet, warm, full, and finally free.